friends, dear students, welcome to our second course on Comparative Politics PhD module. In our previous class, in our previous module, we talked about the consensus democracy as a form of pluralist democracy in world governments, and today we are going to talk about another model which is identified and named as the majoritarian democracy. Dear friends, the book that I'm following, Professor Leibhardt, Arendt Leibhardt, is using the term Westminster interchangeably for the term majoritarian. The British democracy is a typical example of a majoritarian democracy. In the majority rule, the logic of democracy is quite different from the logic of consensus democracy. In the consensus democracy, you try to allow as much different ideologies, identities, regions, so on and so forth. You try to allow all of them to somehow get participated in the government, but in the majoritarian democracy, you try to create one party and stable, powerful governments. Unfortunately, the multi-party governments, the multi-party coalitions are long-lived. They are not as powerful as one-party governments and as long-lasting as them. Dear friends, one of the most famous US presidents, Woodrow Wilson, in one of his early writings had mentioned that the United States should also utilize the British parliamentary regime. Let's adopt the UK parliamentary regime, he said in his early writings. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and many other ex-colonies important the British majoritarian democracy. I can say Cyprus, the south and the north, both are ex-British colonies, but none of them is using the majoritarian democracy. Maybe you would like to keep this in mind. In the majoritarian democracy, as I have previously mentioned, the executive power is concentrated in one party and bare majority cabinets. What is the bare majority cabinet or bare majority government? In a parliamentary regime, if you have 50% plus 1 of the seats, in other words, if you have the simple majority, for instance, if there are 100 seats in a parliament, you should capture 51 seats. That is called bare majority cabinets. Then you have the chance to establish a one-party government. But if no party can exceed the more than one of the half, so establishing the majority, what happens? A coalition government is established. But in majoritarian democracies, it is more likely for one political party to capture the majority of the seats and come into power on its own. So, in such governments, the one party fills the government and no other party members are included in the government. The majoritarian democracy is generally identified with two-party systems. So, the British democracy is actually a two-party system. There are two major parties, two powerful parties, the Conservative and the Labour. And in the majoritarian type of democracy, where two-party systems are dominant, there are two major parties capable of coming into power. Either the one wins the elections or the other. So, as you can see in the case of Conservative Party and the Labour Party in United Kingdom. Dear students, In majoritarian democracy, a large majority is excluded from power and remains in the opposition, either inside the parliament but outside the government, or outside the government as well as outside the parliament. A majority is excluded from power. How this happens? It happens because of the electoral system, of course. In the British electoral system, it is a majoritarian electoral system, and it creates disproportional representation. That is to say, there are so many electoral regions having each of them only one seat to be gained by the political parties or candidates. So, since there is only one seat that can be gained for everyone in the region, in the electoral region, the rule is first past the post. So, the candidate who passes the other candidates wins the elections and becomes that region's member of the parliament. Let me give you an example. If somewhere in United Kingdom there are three candidates, for instance, one conservative candidate, one Labour candidate, and one Liberal candidate, and the Liberal candidate gets like 40%. Sorry, excuse me. The Conservative candidate gets like 40%. The Conservative gets 40%. The Labour 35%, and the Liberal candidate 25%. Who wins the elections? Of course, the first one wins. So the Conservative wins with 40% votes. So what remains? What happens to the remaining 60% of the votes? They go to nowhere. Because who wins? Just the Conservative candidate wins, because there is only one seat, and the one who comes the first gets the seat there, and the remaining votes actually go to nowhere. For instance, another example here, if in the electoral region X, the 35% of votes are gained by the Labour's candidate, 30% of the votes by Conservatives candidate, and 25% of Liberals candidate, and the remaining 10 by the others, the Labour's candidate wins. So 35% vote is represented somehow, but not the remaining 65% vote. Dear friends, in majoritarian democracy, actually in British democracy, and in every parliamentary regime actually, there is the need for vote of confidence. What is the vote of confidence? At least 1 plus the half of the parliament should support the government. That is to say, the simple majority should support the government and should give the government the vote of confidence. If somehow a government is established with the vote of confidence and later on the vote of confidence is brought down, the government collapses because there is no vote of confidence for that government in a parliament. In late 1970s, Labour's leader James Callaghan, his government brought down by vote of no confidence in House of Commons. How can this be? One party on its own in the government, and there is a vote of no confidence to the government. How can this happen? Of course, there were some people in his own party that actually refused to keep his government going. So they gave him vote of no confidence. Thus, the government is still dependent on the vote of confidence in British democracy. Theoretically, a government, even if it has the majority in the parliament, can be voted out of the office. How can this be? Of course, if some people in your party vote against you, they might bring your government down. Prime Minister in United Kingdom is also the party leader, so he or she rules the party and the government at the same time. He or she needs party cohesiveness and majority support in the House of Commons. I repeat, he or she needs party cohesiveness and majority support in the House of Commons. Otherwise, his or her bills might be vetoed. Of course, in multi-party systems, the state is generally ruled by coalition governments, and the cabinet dominance over the legislature is far more limited. Dear friends, the British Parliament is composed of two houses, the House of Commons, composed of elected members, and the House of Lords, the appointed members. The decisions or laws passed by the Commons should also be approved by the Lords and finally by the Queen. As previously mentioned, there is a two-party system in United Kingdom. The two major parties generally win around 85% of the votes. Working class tends to vote for the Labour, while the middle class tends to vote for Conservatives. In 1974 elections, Labour won 39.3% of votes and 316 out of 635 seats. Liberals won 18.6% of seats and only 13 seats. Sorry, there is something wrong with the slide here. I have to correct this. I'm sorry. Liberals won 18.6% of votes. It should be not seats. Liberals won 18.6% of votes, but just 13 seats. Sorry about this. I repeat, Liberals won 18.6% of the votes, but just only 13 seats. So you see the disproportionality here. The Labour winning around 40% gets over the majority, but the Liberals winning around the 1/5 of the votes, only gaining 13 seats. Dear friends, in 20 years' time, from 1979 till 1999, no party won over 44% of votes, but what they won was enough to establish one-party governments. So, with 44% of votes or less, the political parties in United Kingdom had the chance to establish one-party governments. Another thing about the British democracy, there is interest group pluralism in United Kingdom. That is to say, the interest groups are huge in number but small in their members' number. They are huge in number but small in their members' number. What does this mean? Of course, it means that there are so much interest groups organized all around the country and maybe about so many different ideas, so many different identities, so many different social classes, so on and so forth, and they have very, very small numbers of members. Dear friends, another feature of British democracy is that Britain is a unitary state and it has a centralized governance. In the consensus democracy, for instance, Belgium and Switzerland, they were federations, but Britain, United Kingdom, is a unitary state. Finally, the constitution of the United Kingdom is not written. It is a non-written constitution. There is no constitution as a documented paper, but there are basic laws like Constitution Acts of 1852 and 1986, as well as Bill of Rights Act 1999. Sorry, 1990. Not 1999, 1990. And the British Central Bank is under executive control. A central bank might be independent, autonomous, but it might also be under the executive control. And the British Central Bank is one of those that are under executive's control. Dear friends, that will be all for today's class. I'll be looking forward to meet you in our forthcoming class. Thank you. Have a nice day.